One can observe the interstellar spacecraft Avalon moving through space on its way to Homestead 2, a colonized world. The ship is in autonomous mode, and every cabin is vacant. Both the 5,000 passengers and the 258 crew members are hibernating. Abruptly, the ship travels into a belt of asteroids, reducing its defenses. The main shield is given more power, but the ship is headed straight for a massive asteroid. The asteroid strikes the spacecraft unexpectedly, resulting in a number of faults. As the spacecraft starts its self-repairs, one of the sleep pods comes into operation. Jim Preston is a mechanical engineer and was the passenger who woke up. When his pod opens, an automatic system assists in reawakening him. It informs him that he has been in suspended animation for 120 years and that the ship will arrive at Homestead 2 in just 4 months. He is informed that he can take advantage of the ship's opulent features during that period. Before arriving on the planet, Jim is given information regarding his ID band, his cabin, and the main activities he is expected to participate in. Afraid and eager to meet the others on board, he gets ready, exits his cabin, and enters an automated classroom designed for a full class. As the hologram describes the state of Earth, describing it as overpopulated, pricey, and overvalued, Jim becomes a little nervous. Jim keeps questioning why he's the only one there, even though it urges him to save his inquiries for the end of the course. After realizing that the hologram is unable to respond to him, he leaves to look for other people. He arrives at the ship's main concourse. There's an automated information desk offering assistance, but no one is there either. When Jim requests to meet with a real person, a steward is sent to him, but when he discovers that no one else is present, he requests to speak with the captain. Even though he is unable to enter the bridge, he can observe that none of the major crew members are awake when he arrives there. When Jim finally visits the observatory, he discovers that Homestead 2 is actually 90 years away from the ship. When he realizes he woke up too early, he hurries back to the concourse and sends a message to Earth, unsure of how to go back into hibernation, seeking for advice. He finds out from the communication system that it would take about 55 years to receive a response from the expensive call to Earth. Jim is inconsolable. As he wanders around, he comes upon the ship's bar and spots someone else there. He seems odd to the bartender during their conversation. Jim discovers he's an android when he tries to bring him a drink. Arthur is the name of it. Jim is eager to learn more from him, but he is unable to even explain to the android how he could have known in advance. The following morning, Jim wakes up in his cabin and heads to the cantina, where he soon discovers that most of the menu items are exclusive to gold-class passengers. He fixes himself a simple cup of coffee and attempts to troubleshoot his hibernation chamber. He gathers all the tools, figures out how to make it work, and lies down inside the pod. However, nothing takes place. He then makes the decision to enter the crew's hibernation chambers using the items he discovered. That also doesn't work. There are minor faults all across the ship. Jim keeps going back to the bar, largely to chat with Arthur but also to drink. After receiving some advice from the robot, he decides to break into a gold-class room and attempt to enjoy himself on board. Jim checks out every eatery, every game, every entertainment system. But the more he stays there by himself, the more miserable he gets. He wanders the hibernation pods one day after drinking too much, and he stumbles into an airlock housing spacesuits meant for spacewalks. Jim changes into a suit, goes to the airlock, and opens the door by pressing a lever and then a button. When he steps outside the ship, the scenery enthralls him. He is the sole living individual experiencing that particular point in time. Feeling disappointed, Jim lets go of the magnets on his boots and floats in space. Returning inside, he removes the suit but leaves it on and heads back to the airlock. As he pulls the lever to end it all, he suddenly changes his mind, dashes back inside, and trips over a bottle. Jim gets to his feet and finds himself captivated to Aurora, a woman in one of the pods. After listening to her passenger interview and looking over her files in the directory, he falls in love with her. He was later spotted sitting next to her pod and continuing to listen to her interviews. He's reading some of her writing back in the pub and discussing it with Arthur. The irony of his circumstances, waking up early and not making it to his destination, searching for his ideal woman only to discover that she is out of reach, causes him to become fixated. Jim can't stop thinking about her and begins to feel compelled to rouse her up as well. He discusses it with the robot, but he is unable to grasp the dilemma. He would be leaving her there to perish on the ship if he wakes her up for his own gain. Jim initially decides against it, but as time passes, he finds it difficult to let go. Up until the day he decides otherwise. He makes it to her pod and turns it on. He hides and retreats to his room when she awakens and goes through the same motions as he did. He heads to the main concourse a little while later in the hopes of locating her. And there she is, no more clear-cut than he was a year earlier. Jim brings her to the observatory and tells her they are the only ones awake. Then he informs her that he is unable to contact the ship's primary commands or the crew. When Aurora becomes alarmed, she wants to return to her pod. When they arrive, Jim informs her that they are stuck and that the spacecraft does not have any specific equipment that would enable them to go back into sleep. After they return to the concourse, he advises her to take it easy because she has just emerged from hibernation. She feels bad for him because he has to be alone on the ship for over a year. Jim returns to the pub with a sense of regret for his actions. He requests that Arthur keep Aurora's identity a secret from him. Aurora awakens the following day. Returning to the concourse, she inquires about the hibernation pods with the automated information desk. Jim meets her there, and they head to brunch together. The information desk malfunctions of some kind as they are leaving. Jim has been eating the same breakfast for more than a year, and Aurora in the cantina notices this and brings him one of the gold-class meals. While they discuss the prospect of fixing the pods, Aurora isn't prepared to give up, in contrast to Jim. She looks through research papers, the infirmary, and finally arrives at the crew's hibernation rooms where she tries to smash the doors. Jim finds further issues with the ship as a whole. After a while, Aurora bemoans her existence on the Avalon. She writes, swims in the pool, and jogs around the ship while being increasingly conscious of her surroundings. Thinking that Jim's story might be intriguing, she goes to the cantina to interview him. Why did he come to the colony, she wonders. Jim responds by quoting business slogans at first, but he then goes on to say that he hopes to establish a life and become someone in the new world. Aurora eventually reveals her purpose for being there when they eventually arrive at the observatory. She is the only traveler on the ship with a round-trip ticket. Her plan was to visit Homestead 2, stay there for a year, and then return to Earth in order to become the first journalist to accomplish so and write the greatest story in history. As Aurora gradually loses hope in solving their current situation, Jim finds a means to make her feel better. He brings her to the movies, the basketball court, and dancing. Finally, he brings her to meet Arthur at the bar. She unwinds for a while before realizing what has happened to them. Feeling terrible about what he's done to her, Jim is left alone with the robot. The following instant, he is observed fiddling with something, and when Aurora enters the observatory, she discovers a scale model of the Chrysler building that he had built for her. They go on a date at the bar after a while. They converse over dinner while sharing life tales. Her father passed away when she was a teenager, she informs him. Jim brings Aurora to the airlock after supper so they may put on their spacesuits. Together, they take a spacewalk. Jim may now finally tell someone about that amazing encounter. Jim turns off the magnets in their boots, causing them to levitate in space together. After returning inside, they share a kiss right away before retiring to his cabin to sleep together. They soon begin living together as a couple. Moving into his stateroom, Aurora begins writing about her time on the ship. They share meals, sleep, and jog together. Jim discovers the hydroponics bay as he continues to investigate the ship. He brings flowers to Aurora. They visit the observatory to view a red giant that the ship passes by one day. Later that evening, they celebrate Aurora's birthday in the bar before dining at one of the ship's various restaurants. While Aurora remains in the bar speaking with Arthur, Jim uses the restroom to get ready the ring he designed for her. The android informs Aurora that Jim purposefully awakened her up, not realizing he still needed to keep it a secret. She approaches Jim in complete shock when he returns all of a sudden. She flees in a panic, full of rage. When Jim returns to his cabin, everything she owned has vanished. The following day, he bumps into her in the cantina, but as soon as he says anything, she visits Jim's cabin one evening with the intention of killing him, hitting and kicking him. Jim tries to apologize and give her an explanation of his behavior by talking to her over the communication because she continues to avoid him. Aurora doesn't seem to care that he told her he fell in love. She is unable to forgive him for killing her. While Jim is in his cabin one night, there is still another issue. The main command of the ship shuts down when it encounters a critical fault. Later, when he enters the elevator, it breaks down. Jim has planted a tree in the main concourse, which Aurora notices as she enters. She then visits the cantina, where there is a faulty food dispensary. Abruptly, they both hear the deck chief's voice on the comms, inquiring as to who planted the tree. Jim's tree is in front of Gus Mancuso when they both dash into the concourse. They greet the chief and inform him of the circumstances. He doesn't see how 3 pods could go bad. When Mancuso brings them to the bridge, he finds that there is a problem with the spacecraft, but that manual verification of the data on the systems is required. They warn Mancuso that there have been more frequent problems throughout the ship when a robot nearly falls on their heads as they exit the bridge. As he demonstrates to them how to get the data, he says that shouldn't occur. Jim joins Mancuso as he checks on the pods. He knows what transpired with Aurora's pod. The deck chief thinks Jim did a terrible thing. Later, Aurora joins him at the bridge where he is reviewing the gathered data. They discuss what transpired with her pod, but he informs her that there is nothing he can do. Jim enters carrying the 16th damaged robot. Mancuso goes to bed after getting the hibernation illness, but on his way out, he coughs up blood. When Aurora can't sleep that night, she takes a swim. She begins to drown as the water in the pool moves with her when the ship suddenly loses gravity. She narrowly survives when the gravity drive resets. While searching for Mancuso, they cross paths with one another. Returning to the bridge, the 3 of them are gradually learning what has been happening with the ship. Mancuso discovers that a significant system was destroyed 2 years ago. The entire ship is trying to take up the slack, therefore they need to identify and address the root of the problem. The whole ship will be stuck if they don't fix it. Mancuso passes out as they search for the issue, so Jim and Aurora take him to the hospital. There is nothing that can stop him from dying or extend his time on this earth. When the 3 of them finally get together in the observatory, Mancuso gives Jim his ID bracelet, orders them to fix the ship, and then promptly dies. Abruptly, the ship begins to tremble as the lights turn a frightening crimson. After telling Aurora that he needs her assistance, Jim and Aurora head for engineering, but the gravity drive has another malfunction. And very away Arthur is afflicted with another one. Jim turns him off. When they do make it to engineering, they begin to search for the issue. When they open the hatch after discovering it in the power plant, Aurora is drawn within. There is a hole in the hole they're made by the asteroid. Jim is drawn in as well, but he manages to escape by holding onto the hatch as it continues to close. He eventually gets drawn in as well, but they are able to shut the opening in a flash. Jim discovers there are other hull breaches as soon as he solves that issue. After tracking the meteor's path, the 2 discover that it struck the reactor control computer. Jim believes he can locate spare parts for it. Even when they locate and replace the part, the reactor's venting procedure still fails. They attempt it by hand, but it keeps failing. Jim discovers that in order to cool the reactor, he must open the vent door from the exterior of the spacecraft. They head to the airlock together, and as he prepares to leave, he gives Aurora Mancuso his bracelet because he might not return. After assisting him with the suit, she tells him to return since she cannot survive aboard the ship without him as he enters the airlock. After reaching critical temperatures, Aurora returns to the reactor. Jim notices the door as he approaches the vent from the outside and a reactor bolt shoots into her arm. As he tries to open the vent door by circumventing it, the temperature in the reactor room rises. Before long, he tells Aurora that he will need to physically hold the door open to allow the reactor to vent. He tells her to vent the reactor even if she doesn't agree with the strategy. They quarrel because she doesn't want him to die, but he convinces her that they must save the others, so she lets off the reactor. The procedure works, but Jim is pushed away and loses his tether by the reactor's fumes. His suit's pressure is also decreasing. After telling Aurora what occurred, she rushes to change into a new costume so that she can bring him in. He offers her another apology. Unfortunately, her tether is too short, so she had to wear a suit and fly out to fetch him. She's drawn away, but then she manages to bring him in by grabbing onto his leash. When Jim is taken to the hospital by Aurora, she discovers that he has passed away. She resuscitates Mancuso by using his wristband to circumvent the prescribed course of action. Jim is revived by the medical pod, which completes the task automatically. Aurora gives him her forgiveness. Afterwards, Mancuso is given a respectable space burial when Aurora fixes Arthur. Jim informs her he's managed to turn the medical pod into a hibernation pod as he leads her to the infirmary. He instructs her to enter the pod and spend the remainder of the voyage inside. However, as will become clear later, she declines and chooses to remain awake aboard the ship with him. After living their entire lives on the ship, Jim eventually pops the question to her. The Avalon arrives on Homestead 288 years later. When the crew awakens, they discover the ship in an extremely strange state. In a message to them, Aurora recounts the life she and Jim led on the ship while the others were asleep.